Starting a new organization in a new place.
Where you going?
I'll tell you. Then I gotta kill you. California.
Ghost, come on, man, don't do this.
Tariq, if you do this shit, you can never go back.
You knew it always come to this. He may not be here no more, but ghosts never die.
So Power Legacy's writer's room is set to open pretty soon, and having Gary Lennon on board, starting fresh, bringing new ideas, hopefully a different spin, hopefully in a new city, as well as having Joseph Sikora on board who will also want to make sure they do the show justice, I do think the show will be a lot better in terms of the writing, cast and the storyline. With that being said, in this particular breakdown, we're going to split this video into 4 chapters for what we can expect in terms of Power Legacy, and just some general questions and things I do hope they keep in mind. Number 1, the timeline. Number 2, the meaning behind Power Legacy, and why I think it just makes absolutely perfect sense to finally give us that hallucination scene with Ghost. You guys are definitely going to enjoy that particular chapter. Number 3, a bit more about the storyline, which will act as a perfect segue to number 4, characters that we could see in terms of crossovers. Although I do think this show could actually benefit from a completely brand new cast. But stick with this video right through to the very end. There definitely is a lot to discuss and unpack, and I do want you guys to also chip in with your thoughts, especially when it comes to the meaning of Legacy, as well as Ghost's hallucination scene in chapter 2. But starting with the timeline question. Now, from a timeline perspective, I do think it is important that they do make this make sense. We always knew there would be another present day spin-off in the current timeline, but from a timeline perspective, I have felt over the years that the timeline of the shows hasn't really been made clear to the audience, and I do think it's caused a big confusion. There's even been small details like Kane's age that was wrong on the rap sheet back in Power Book 2 Ghost, which actually made him older than Zeke.
There's a lot of people talking about Kane's birth being in 1997. You guys, that was, that from that form, I do want to say that was our mistake. It was an art department mistake. Zeke is born in 98, Kane is born after that.
Small things like this during Book 2 Ghost made us question the timeline, ages of certain characters, and in fact, that's been happening for a very long time, dating all the way back to Power. The ages of Breeze, Kane and Ghost and Tommy. Over the last couple of years, some of you guys have even asked me to do a timeline breakdown of the entire world of Power, and if I'm going to be totally honest, a lot of the timeline doesn't actually make sense. Corny Kemp even said the entire Power show actually happens in the span of 6 months, so I do think once the shows are actually complete, I can probably sit down and actually create a logical timeline that makes sense from Raising Kanan to Power, Ghost, Force, and then Legacy. But I do also think over the years, because of the order of the shows between Ghost, Force, and Raising Kanan, having BMF sandwiched in between, having the orders of the shows kind of switching and changing, the switch in the order of the shows didn't help either. The writer's strike, which was out of their control, again, didn't help. And it is one of the most common questions I do get when we see these kind of crossovers, dating all the way back to season 1 of Ghost. For example, when in the timeline did Tommy get time to come back to New York in season 3 of Ghost? You're talking a 12-hour plus drive, and that's not even taking into account any breaks. Between everything that Tommy was dealing with back in Force, when did he even get time to come back to New York? So, I do think it is important the timeline does make sense. And with the phone call that Tariq received in the after-end credit scene back in Ghost season 4, I do also think it's pretty much a given that Tariq also now shows up in Chicago towards the back end of Force season 3, to then set up Power Legacy. I really do hope it just makes sense from a timeline perspective. I mean, they can make it make sense by having a small time jump that can bring everything together. Tommy sorts his shit out in season 3 with Miguel Garcia, the CBI, Shanti, Jannard, Maria, and also his family. A bit of time then passes, maybe 6 to 8 months, or whatever they deem appropriate for that particular storyline. They make it clear in a conversation or on screen, they just say 6 months later, and that's when Tariq gets the phone call. They can have a bit of a time jump. However they decide to do it, I do think the timeline is important, and I just hope they don't kind of skip past it. Make the timeline make sense, make Tariq's crossover make sense, and then start Power Legacy fresh with the right ideas, cast, and the storyline. With that being said, let's talk a bit more about the storyline, actually starting with the name Power Legacy, and then you're going to see why this could potentially tie into a hallucination scene of Ghost. Now, this is something Joseph Sikora actually mentioned on X a very long time ago. At least the show won't be called Force. So even he wasn't happy with the name. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he actually had a hand in naming the next Power show Legacy. So, on the show being called Legacy, if you actually think deeper and a little outside the box, Legacy goes all the way back to the Ghost man himself, James St. Patrick, the influence that Ghost had on both Tommy and Tariq, how Ghost's legacy, his ambition, his mistakes, moral conflicts, still to this very day continues to have an impact on both of these characters. You're also talking about a shift from Ghost over to Tariq, the next generation. Although on that particular point, straight after Ghost Season 4, I did create a video where I asked the question, did Tariq really earn the name Ghost? In that particular breakdown, I went through the arguments for and against, and right at the end I mentioned, the only person who's actually worthy of giving Tariq the name Ghost is Tommy Egan himself. Even then, I still don't think fans will buy it. And personally, I think Tariq has a very big battle ahead to try and convince us as the audience that he's worthy of the name. I personally don't think he ever will be. That's just my opinion, but let's wait and see. Now, in terms of the name Legacy, you're talking about bringing two of the biggest characters from both shows and putting them together, two Power OGs, bringing together everything that's happened from Power, Power Book 2 Ghost, Power Book 4 Force, multiple crossovers, beef that they've had in the past, 4 cases where Tash has named Tommy as a kingpin, and everything else that's happened before.
Did you fucking feel that? This is the game. Every fucking moment of your life, if you ain't pushing, you falling.
So everything that's happened in the past, you're bringing together two of the characters who have a lot of history. You're bringing together two characters who had a really close bond with Ghost. But naming it Legacy ties everything together from past, present, and most likely also future, because they do say power never ends. So if you're actually calling it Legacy, if you're bringing together two Power OGs who have the closest ties to Ghost, if you're talking about the legacy of Power, the chain goes all the way back to Ghost. And you guys know how we've been talking about the chains in Power recently. The same can definitely be said here. With both of these characters coming together in the world of Power, why not have that hallucination scene of Ghost where we finally see Omari Hardwick returning, maybe right at the back end of Power Legacy, whether it's a hallucination scene for Tommy, Tariq, or maybe even both. Just having a look at this from Tommy's kind of perspective, when we've seen Tommy having a hallucination scene before, the most recent being Holly Weaver in 4 Season 2, and just before that, when they kicked off 4 Season 2, it was the voice of Liliana. These visions, voices, hallucinations, or even dream sequences, you'll notice across Power they normally happen when someone's going through emotional turmoil, guilt, or where they may be making a life-changing decision. That's when we often see these hallucinations. For example, Tariq seeing Kanan where he was acting as a devil on his shoulder, or Ghost seeing Angela back in the same red dress she wore when she walked into Club Truth.
Ramona believes in me like you did, Angie.
Do you see a future with her?
I do.
Now, when you think about who Ghost was for Tommy, he was more than just a brother. Just being there with Tariq is going to remind him a lot about Ghost, his relationship with him, his brotherhood, the fights, the bad times, the good times, and Tariq is going to be a constant reminder. Even though I don't think Tariq has actually earned the name of Ghost, you can't deny that there is a lot of shared characteristics, father like son. I mean, even Tommy said it himself before.
Loyal only to your own cause. Sound exactly like Ghost.
You just as low down and grimy as your old man.
So, I do think it would be quite fitting to genuinely have a hallucination scene of Ghost in Legacy right at the back end, maybe when it's time to say goodbye to Tommy's character arc, because I do think it could be the final chapter for his character. Having Ghost's hallucination scene right at the end could be a final message to Tommy, kind of guiding him on his final decision, or his final moment. Remember, hallucination scenes go back to emotional turmoil, guilt, life-changing decisions, maybe even a happy moment where Tommy's reflecting on his and Ghost's past from their early years. Maybe Tommy comes back to a specific place where he grew up with Ghost, coming back to his grave, coming back to Club Truth, just standing outside in this exact same spot where we saw them talking back in Power episode 101. They can do it in so many different ways to bring Tommy's journey full circle. The possibilities are genuinely endless. We've seen how they've used hallucinations in storytelling so many times before, and honestly it would just be the perfect way to end Power Legacy. Just like I mentioned, the title, the theme, it all implies that Ghost's influence will still be lingering around over Tommy and Tariq, and whether they choose to accept this part of their legacy or reject it. A hallucination scene would be a really great way to send a powerful message to either Tommy or Tariq, and also to honor Ghost's character. That way you can bridge all 4 shows together, Power, Ghost, Force, and also Power Legacy. You take it back to what started this entire world of Power in the first place, kind of serving as a plot device to honor Omari Hardwick as Ghost and what he did for Power, but also emphasizing the fact how his legacy, how his power, dreams, and ambition, how he's still part of both Tommy and Tariq.
He might not be here no more, but ghosts never die.
You've heard me say it before, power is a constant cycle. There's a lot of symmetry when it comes to these storylines. Sons following their fathers, partners betraying each other, the cycles of betrayal, power, powder, and respect. And a ghost hallucination scene would honestly just fit the theme of what they've done before, more so for Power Legacy. Maybe he finally admits to Ghost himself, you were right all along. Maybe it forces him to confront his guilt and define his own legacy, in a moment where he's, for example, shot, just like Monet saw Mecca, Lorenzo, and Zeke. But placing this right at the back end of the series, right at the end of Legacy, it would honestly just bring everything full circle in such a great way, which would also cement the title Legacy as a kind of final tribute to Ghost's presence. For Tommy, it can serve as a final piece of the jigsaw and kind of a moment of closure. I mean, I can go even deeper into this particular chapter of Ghost Hallucination and why it would make absolutely perfect sense, and it is something I definitely will touch on closer to Legacy. But honestly, it would just be a real fitting end to not just honouring Omari Hardwick and what he's done for the world of Power, but also bringing everything together from Power, Ghost, Force, and then whatever happens in Legacy, bringing everything full circle, taking it all the way back to the character who's arguably had the biggest influence on both Tommy and Tariq. But that's a bit on the title and the hallucination scene. With that being said, let's dissect a bit more about the storyline. Now, what actually brings Tommy and Tariq together? Who's the big bad? Does D-Mac cross over into the new show? How do they make this story make sense and make it interesting for us as the audience? These are all the questions I think we can't exactly answer at this moment in time. I do think once season 3 gets going, we'll probably get a better idea. But there is something I do actually want to touch on.
Yeah, I do. What the fuck is going on now?
Now, this is something I haven't spoken about before. It does actually sound as if Tommy's asking Tariq a question, as if Tariq's got something he needs, because Tariq does mention, yeah, I do, what's going on though? So, it does seem like Tommy's after something that Tariq has that he doesn't. Maybe he's asking if he's got soldiers that he can bring over to Chicago to help him fight a war. And that's when we're going to see Tariq crossing over, which is all we can probably go on at this moment in time. I mean, it really isn't much, but once we get going into the storyline for season 3, maybe we will be able to put some of the pieces of the puzzle together. We speculated a lot over the year or so around the Call, around the Italians, Elisa Marie Proctor and her coming back for revenge. I'm not going to go through each and every single one of those theories and predictions over and over again. If you guys haven't seen those couple of breakdowns, I will leave the link to them down below in the description section. But what I think we can definitely speak about and speculate is the question around what city will Tariq and Tommy be in? At this moment in time, Tariq is in New York and Tommy is in Chicago. So, do they have Tommy and Tariq possibly come back to New York? Now with this one, I personally hope it is a new city. I think New York actually needs a bit of a breather. I think they've already been there and done that in New York. And I really do think the show would benefit a lot more if it isn't a new city just like LA.
You can go to hell or California. Same thing.
We know Tommy was off to LA just before Chicago. There are also characters like Rodolfo in LA with ties to Jason Michich. That way you can bring in a lot of new faces, have 1 or 2 crossovers which we're going to speak about in just a moment. But having it in a new city allows them to bring in a fresh new set of characters, have new crews, new threats, and just start fresh with new ideas. Take both Tommy and Tariq out of their comfort zones, especially Tariq. I think Tommy will be Tommy wherever he goes, but if you genuinely think about Tariq's story arc, all he's ever known is actually New York. When's the last time we've actually seen Tariq go to another city, deal with another connect, build back up right from the bottom in a new city, in a new environment? There was a time where he went to Milan back in season 3 of Ghost, but other than that, I can't think of anything else where Tariq's kind of been out of his comfort zone in like a new environment, at least in terms of a new city. We have seen him in uncomfortable positions before, like being in jail, but being in a new city, being surrounded by different threats, a new environment, I mean, it's completely different. So taking Tariq out of his comfort zone out of New York, him being alongside Tommy, I do think that is needed. I've also said it before, I think Tommy building his organization, coming up against a new threat, taking out the Connect, trying to be the Connect, is a constant cycle. So whatever they do in Power Legacy, whoever the big bad is, whether it's the Italians or someone else, I do think the show will benefit from being in a new city. And for continuity purposes with what was said back in Power, I really would love Tommy and Tariq to head off to California. Having said that, if they wanted to really have the show in New York, I mean, they definitely can. I do think it has its challenges because Tommy is supposed to be dead in New York, but if they really wanted to find a workaround, they can bend reality and make it happen. I just think Tommy's lost so much in New York. He's been there and done that. I personally think send Tariq and Tommy to LA, take Tariq out of his comfort zone, introduce him to some fresh new faces, a new connect, a new couple of crews. Let Tariq learn from Tommy and act as his final mentor. I think Tommy acting as a final mentor to Tariq is going to be a big part of Power Legacy, this passing of the baton. But I do also hope they make the gap clear between Tommy and Tariq. I genuinely don't care if Tariq has ended up being the biggest drug dealer in New York. He's still nowhere near Tommy's level.
I'm Tariq St. fucking Patrick!
So I mean, there's a big difference between the two, and Tariq definitely has still a lot to learn. Again, going back to my breakdown straight off the back of Ghost Season 4, where I asked the question whether Tariq actually earned the name Ghost, I mentioned, I do think Tariq could actually benefit by having a mentor like Tommy. He still needs to learn how to fight, and who better to teach him than Tommy? That's something I definitely want to see in Power Legacy. Tariq definitely needs to learn how to throw hands, because he's been punked around for way too long in Power Book 2 Ghost, dating all the way back to Season 1. I also want them to make him human, don't give him too much plot armor, which goes back to the point of taking him out of his comfort zone of being in a new city. I mean, he has been out of his comfort zone with things like being on his own, having to deal with the Tasha St. Patrick case in Season 1, him going to jail for a short period. But we've all heard about stories where Tommy's been stabbed before, even Ghost in Power, even he was shot. We then saw Tommy being shot in 4 Season 2. More recently in Raising Kanan, there was Marvin who got caught by Aaron in the fight in the apartment. This is what I want them to do with Tariq, make him more human, have him go through something similar to what Franklin Saint went through when he was shot multiple times by Mel. I still think Tariq needs to go through a lot to turn him into the character he potentially can be. Tommy can also help him understand who Ghost was, who Kanan was, who Breeze was. Perception is definitely everything, and over the past couple of weeks in multiple breakdowns, I have spoken about different character views and relationships. Every single character will view events differently because it's just human nature. We'll all have different views, perceptions, and opinions. Tommy telling him about Ghost will be different to the way Kanan spoke to Tariq about Ghost, or the way Tasha has. I think Tommy acting like a final mentor to Tariq can definitely work, guiding Tariq in so many different ways. I definitely do think it is the right way to go, but again, I do hope they make that gap clear between Tommy and Tariq. Rather than them being partners, Tommy definitely needs to be leading the way. I do think at times we definitely will see Tariq's smarts come through, because at the end of the day, he is smart. In Book 2 Ghost, he was the brains. The Tejadas and everybody around him always used to look to Tariq to create the plan.
With me, Tariq. Fuck do you want me to do? I don't know. You always come up with a plan. You have something, right?
So in Power Legacy, I do think we will see a couple of those moments, but there definitely is still a huge gap between Tommy and Tariq. And by the time Power Legacy comes to an end, 3 or 4 seasons in depending on how long they have, let's see where Tariq is then. With that being said, let's move over to the next and final chapter, which is character crossovers. Now, in terms of crossovers, I have no doubt in my mind that we will see a character or two from either Power Book 2 Ghost, Force, or maybe even Power. I've always had in mind Davis MacLean. Think about it. If you guys need a lawyer or some sort of help with his connections or help beating a case, well, you don't get better than Davis MacLean. From Power and Ghost, there's also 2-Bit, who I've spoken about before, but there's also Braden Weston. Definitely don't rule out characters like Braden, especially with his relationship with Tariq. And no Gianni's mentioned before that he's done with Power. I think it was in a TikTok live or a interview with TMZ, but you can never rule out just a one-off appearance or even a full return. Things definitely change in the world of acting pretty quick, but even if it is just a little appearance for a episode or 2, I do think Braden is definitely one we need, because his interaction with Tommy really would be hilarious. Now there's also of course Tasha. I think she's a given. Wherever Tariq is, I think we'll always see Tasha pop back up. But if we were to genuinely think deeper into connections and crossovers, then there's also Julio.
How you know my name?
Chico, Julio's boy from Queens.
Now Julio was actually said to have connections all over the place, and who's to say he didn't have any in LA? There's also characters like Jason Michich and Rodolfo. I wouldn't be surprised if there's another set of Serbs in LA because of ties to Jason Michich. There's definitely a lot they can do in terms of crossovers, from characters who are dead like Julio, to characters who are alive like Braden and Davis MacLean, all the way to small plot points that were raised back in Power. But all in all, I still think and I do hope they bring in a fresh set of new characters, some brand new crews, a new connect, and just some freshness to the world of Power. But that's a breakdown of where we are, what we know about Power Legacy at this moment in time, and just some general thoughts around Legacy from a timeline perspective, the meaning behind Legacy, and how they can actually tie in Ghost Return and make this make sense for Power Legacy. But the floor is now yours. Drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section. Now that we've had a bit of time to digest the news, think a little deeper, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.